Our gospel from this week comes to us from Luke chapter 6. Jesus said, "But I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good for those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even the sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies, do good, and lend expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put in your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back." This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. Ellie just ran away, but we could do a little children's time here if she comes back. Okay. Come on up, Thomas. She'll be back. We can start talking about what we're going to talk about, though. This is whenever we come back into session after a break, like a school vacation. Although, just a little word of apology to the Marblehead kids who didn't even get a spring break this year. They didn't get a February vacation. That's hard, right? Well, anyway, we did over in Salem, so we took a little trip. Where did we go, guys? Yeah, we went to Florida. Did we have fun down there? We went in Gogo's pool. What did you do down there, Ellie? You went underwater, that's right. You did a lot of going underwater. It was excellent. I was very proud of you. What was your favorite part of the trip? Going upside down in the pool. That's right, doing somersaults with your mask on, which is pretty impressive. So basically, we should have just stayed in the pool the entire time, Kara. I think that any other activity we had planned was not as good as the pool in the eyes of the kids. Could have just planned that for the next vacation. Well, Dad, it was good to see you. That was a wonderful vacation. Thanks for having us. And here we are. We're back, okay? Now we're back. That was enough fun time. Now it's time to get serious. We have our annual meeting after the service, so we got to really crack down and be serious about this. You're heading back to school on Monday. The good times are over. That's what I'm trying to say. Let's sing our song. No, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to say that it's really good, and you feel it, I think even right now, it's really good for us to take a break every once in a while and do a vacation like that. You might not know this, but everybody out in the pews right now, this is like their vacation. This is their weekly vacation where they go to feel that good every week so that they can just let go of everything that was bothering them, be refreshed, get a lot of energy for the week ahead. And I think everybody here looks forward to Sunday the way that you look forward to the pool. Okay, someday you'll feel that same way. You ready? If anybody asks you who I am, who I am, who I am, if anybody asks you who I am, tell them I'm a child of God. Will you join me in prayer? O Lord, may the meditations of my heart and the words of my mouth be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. So because we're a little disrupted in our flow because of snow and everything, just a quick recap of where we are. We are in the finale of our preaching series on Epiphany, on this season of the church year where we're introduced to Jesus' early life and ministry, kind of all heading towards this final question of who is Christ? And that's not quite over yet. We'll talk a little bit about the next Sunday, Transfiguration Sunday, where perhaps we see most the answer to that question. But this is the conclusion of my preaching series. And it's a two-parter. So if you missed last week, go back and watch it later. You should know this. Jesus is preaching what might be the most famous sermon of his life. It's called the Sermon on the Plain, not to be confused with the Sermon on the Mount, but the content is very similar. The first week, we heard the Beatitudes, a fairly important piece of Christian text. And this week, we hear the second half of what he has to say: turn the other cheek, love your enemies. Also pretty critical to what we hear Jesus as being. We talked in the season of Epiphany about stories, about the story of Jesus, the story of us, the story of Clifton, the story of our world, how each of these stories can be imprinted. They should be imprinted on one another, so that when we think about our lives and the story of our lives, we are thinking about the life of Christ. When we think about the life of the church, we should be thinking about the life of the body of Christ as well. These things should be mutually reinforcing. That story is critically important. Now, I like telling stories. I don't know if you do too. I really enjoy, threading the good yarn. And I'll tell you, the most important thing about storytelling is you have to know from the very beginning what kind of story you're telling. Okay? If you are telling a mystery and you want to get your audience engaged in this mystery story, from the very onset, you have to be dropping clues. And this is critical to me about mystery stories too. The clues have to all be there. It has to all add up in the end, because you want your audience to be able to guess the mystery from the clues that you have planted. I will show you a frustrated audience if in the end they never could have guessed the end of the story. If you withheld the clue that mattered the most. That's a terrible story. That's a very frustrating mystery. You don't want to do that. You have to know from the very beginning what kind of story you're telling, because it matters in the end. Oh, here's another example. If you are telling a heist story, maybe it's a bank robbery, by the end of the story, by the end of the bank robbery, you must have a bank robbery take place. Right? The heist movie has to be solved in the logic of its own story. If your bank robbery ends with a couple kissing and decide to get married, and the bank robbery never happens, your audience will be frustrated. Now, maybe you'll say to me, yes, but my heist movie is also a love story. And it's just a kind of Bonnie and Clyde thing that's taking place at the same time. That's fine. They can both kiss and rob a bank. That's what they should do. It should be both of those things. If they just forget about one of them, then your story is incomplete. There's a reason why I'm talking about this. Right now, we are trying to figure out, in the life of the story of Christ, what is his story all about? Maybe even you could say, what genre are we working in? Last week, the language that I used to formulate this was combative. It was war. It was the battle, and frankly, that's not exactly correct. Now, a lot of human stories are about that. Actually, I would say that if we were to do a canvassing of all the stories that humankind has told over the centuries, most of them are told in the logic of violence. It's a big genre. So within the logic of violence, the main character has something that can only be solved through a well-timed punch or a spear through the heart of his enemy, or through some sort of violence in the end. And these stories can be all sorts of different kinds. They can be revenge narratives. They can be the overcoming of an evil of some sort. Any number of things. They can be tragic, they can be good, but you know it when you see it. I mean, like, for instance, I don't know, is the Avengers movies, is that too old now? Are we on to some new cycle? I stopped watching them. Honestly, I stopped watching them because they're so violent. And not that I'm against that or something. I'm just bored by it at this point in time, right? I'm bored by it because the Avengers movies were told in the language of violence, and so they were limited in what they could talk about. The big main arc was about this guy named Thanos. He had this idea where he wanted half of everyone to die because he thought there wasn't enough for everybody. That's a really dumb idea. People have talked about this endlessly, about how that's a dumb idea, that population will just be back to that at some other level. Why couldn't... There was tons of philosophical reasons why it was a bad idea, but all of us knew that in a story about violence, there was only one way this story was going to be solved, which was somebody punching Thanos in the face, right? That was the logic of the story, and therefore it was the logic that we expected. And if I told the story of Jesus in the language of violence last week, I would be incorrect. That is not the summation of Jesus' life and ministry. To be sure, the way that the story of Jesus will end will involve violence, horrible violence. There will be blood. Swords will be drawn. There will be an act of brutality that is so commemorated that we put the very implement up on the walls. It's the key feature of Christianity. We do not shy away from the gore and from the acknowledgement that violence is a part of our lived experience. And week in and week out, we look clear-headedly as Christians at the violence in the world, the violence that is happening in places like Haiti, in Ukraine, in Gaza. We talk about the violence that could happen and how we can avoid it, how we can be peacemakers, how we don't want to go to war with Canada or Greenland, how we don't want there to be escalations of violence in the world. We look at this violence, we acknowledge it, but we understand that the logic of our story is not more violence. We are never going to solve the hurts of the world by hurting it more. What Jesus offers us is a story that is really unique. It's a story that everyone expects is going to end that way because it's all the stories we've ever told and we're almost bored with them at this point in time. But he does a bait and switch right now when he says, love your enemies. Wait a minute, how is that going to help us overcome them? Those people who abuse you, give to them more of what they ask. Kill them with kindness might be the way to put this. There's something revolutionary about the ethic of Jesus that is flipping this story on its head. And I'm going to have to rush to the end, because if all we ever heard from Jesus was this nice platitude about doing good things for people, we would say, sorry, buddy, that doesn't add up. This is just how I get taken advantage of, man. Like, this guy took my cloak, and you're telling me to give him a shirt. Now I'm shirtless. I cannot be shirtless. I need to be shirted. He would say, of course, that you need to understand that within the context of a God of resurrection, of a God for whom violence wasn't the end of the story, but the end of the story was a resurrection, an undoing of the very violence that was a part of it. There's another reason why I'm using this story and talking about these stories right now. I was asked on this Sunday to preach a particular message, and I'm not going to do it. I was asked by a group months ago who helped to ring the bell in Marblehead this morning. Are you familiar with why the bells ring in Marblehead? So this is the anniversary of a very famous historical event called Leslie's Retreat. Okay, and so this anniversary commemorates the day when the British General Leslie, having been ordered to cross the North Bridge in Salem and Marblehead are connected at this point in time, comes through Marblehead on Sunday morning, hoping that everyone's going to be in their pews and not noticing that a sneaky little British army's kind of creeping through town, and they're going to go confiscate the guns, the gunpowder. They're going to disarm the American militia. And it doesn't work. The people are alarmed, and what ends up happening is that a minister in Salem talks to Leslie and says, if you just do a symbolic crossing of this bridge, if you follow the letter of your order, which is to cross the North Bridge, say that you don't find any guns, leave the guns where they are, and then cross back over again, we will call this all off and no blood has to be shed today. And that's precisely what happens. And it's known as Leslie's Retreat. Of course, we call it Leslie's Retreat because we're very proud of ourselves and we think that that was a nice story where we won. And the group that came to me asking to preach about this said, preach a story about reconciliation, preach a sermon about how you can talk your way through things, about the value of doing that, which isn't a bad message. I hope you hear some message like that later today. But my problem with that is that's not the message of the story of the American Revolution, is it? If the truth was that was how America was born, we wouldn't have the martyrs, we wouldn't have the patriots, we wouldn't have the heroes who did take up those arms and put their lives at risk. That is not the language of how the story ended. It takes people doing a whole lot more than just talking through things, unfortunately, sometimes. So that's the real world. That is the violence that is, unfortunately, all around us. It's in our history, it's probably going to be in our future. And the Christian answer to this is going to be incredibly important in our future. Because I have to say, I predict a rocky one. I predict a potentially violent one. And it's been telegraphed to us. And I'm seeing it coming from a lot of different places, but there is this inevitability that we must come to blows with one another in order to move into our next period in history. And the Christian says that inevitability is not there. There is always a way. There is always a way for us to love one another into the future. And it's going to take each and every one of us becoming adept at speaking that language, at telling that story, and probably most importantly, and this is how I conclude this sermon series, telling it with your life, showing it with the choices that you make, with the virtues that you have cultivated, with the kind of message that your life as a story tells others. If you can be generous at a time of stinginess, if you can be patient at a time of impatience, if you can be loving at a time of hate, then you are showing the world that we need not fall back into the story that is old, that is ancient, that is violent, that is vile. But we can instead live into a future that we have been promised is coming to fruition. It's the promise of the future of God's kingdom, of resurrected Christ, of a future that is good for all. Amen.